Welcome everyone to the first Imirt Inspire, and thanks Dren for joining us. I'm just going
Yeah.
to switch over to Brenda actually to introduce you.
So this is Brenda, and thanks everybody for coming. So I've had the opportunity to work with Dren on quite a few games, everything from the original Ghost Recon that we worked on together. Most recently, I guess, Dangerous Dave and Gunman Taco Truck. We regularly use Dren for our stuff. And so Dren has been in the game industry for a long time. I sort of think of him as he currently operates his own game company, Nerd Tracks. He also is teaching in the Technology and Applied Composition program at San Francisco Conservatory of Music. He has served as the Director of Development for the Game Audio Network Guild. He's a regular speaker at GDC in a ton of different places. So that's, I guess the basic bio. But the thing that I like about Dren is I know that he has been just a wonderful member of the audio community. And when people have questions, he's always got lots of time for them and to encourage young sound designers. And one of the things Dren talks about the most is get audio in at the very beginning. And that has made a big difference in our games. So I guess with that, I'll remute myself and listen.
All right. All right. Well, hi everyone. I guess I'll do just a little brief intro, talk about myself a little bit, and it seems funny talking to a computer. This is just kind of a surreal experience. So feel free to interject, and I'll maybe kind of riff or whatever you end up asking me here in the chat. I'm looking at the chat as we go. I kind of got started really in the music industry first, and I've been doing that for a real long time. Putting out records. I think the first one I put out was maybe '92 or '93, something like that, and running a record label, and then running a lot of various other things in the music industry, putting out records, recording records, making labels and DVDs, and I kind of going through that whole process for a long time and learning it. I think my first job was in a recording studio, so I kind of learned that whole process way back when we were using tape and we weren't using computers yet for music. So that's kind of my music experience as it kind of led up to getting into the game world, where I had a lot of friends working in it, and the music industry can be a very cruel place. So it was very easy for me to make a decision to kind of just move into games where it was a very welcoming atmosphere. The environment in the game world was much friendlier than it was in the music industry. I've been to South by Southwest many times back in the early '90s, and the first time I went to GDC, it was like going to a fantasy world. I didn't believe that people could be so friendly, that people would be so anxious to talk to me and tell me what they were working on or listen to what I had to say. It was a complete 180 from being at a music industry event like South by Southwest. It was great to find an industry that really welcomed everybody, and that was just so interesting, where we had so many different types of people work in the industry, which is what I really liked. I didn't necessarily like working with just music people all the time. It was one of the other reasons I liked working in the game world, because I could work with artists, I could work with game designers, I could work with programmers and animators, and everyone has a different outlook and worldview and something else to add to the whole process of making a game, which is a little more rewarding than just making an album. That seems one-dimensional to me now. Making a game seems so much more worthwhile or challenging. So,
Just want to butt in there with a question related to that.
yeah.
So how did you feel like the music industry was less welcoming?
They were, well,
To new people or to anyone?
to just kind of anybody, unless you specifically had something to offer them. It wasn't a big, in the specifically in the game audio world, we have, everyone kind of knows each other. Everyone will call each other if they can't do a gig and give them opportunities or ask for help on something. Um, there's definitely a lot of give and take that's really welcome in the music industry. I never really found that. I mean, we would find bands that we would play with and tour with, and on that level, there was a little bit more community. There would be a group of bands in the Bay Area or in Portland or in Seattle that we would always play with whenever we would tour, and so there was a little bit of community that way. But if you went to, say, a conference, no one was really interested in talking to you unless you had something to offer them in return, as far as, maybe you had a recording studio, maybe you ran a label and people would want to talk to you. But if you were just a band that was just, doing interesting things, but, no one really had a buzz on you, then they didn't really want to hang out with you and spend time with you when they could find someone else that could advance their career that they could spend time talking to, if that makes sense.
That's very interesting. What caused you then to look at games as a different?
Well, I had a lot of friends who were already in the industry, either working in audio, but a lot of them were working in other aspects like design. Like I had a friend. I grew up in Long Beach and went to Long Beach State, and I had a friend who also went to Long Beach State that I had worked with at one of our little crap jobs, Bill Roper, who ended up going to Blizzard. He left our crap job that we worked at together and went to go to Blizzard. He was just going to help them typeset manuals and what else he was going to, and he was going to help them with some MIDI stuff. That was like he was going to typeset some manuals and do some MIDI stuff for them. This is when Blizzard was pretty small. This must have been 93 or so. And maybe even earlier, 91, 92. And so Bill went to go work there, and then ended up, like, the next time I called Blizzard, asked him where a file was for our little crap job that we used to have. He was on the answering tree system, and he's designing games, and he's producing games, and like he became pretty big part of what Blizzard was doing in those days. So he was one of those people that, and he used to play bass in my band when we had we had a regular bass player who had orchestra gigs too, and when he couldn't make our shows, we would have Bill come in and sit in. So I knew Bill pretty well. So I had some people like that who I already knew that were in the industry, and had been hearing about it, and it just seemed kind of like a logical place to go to.
And so when was that? When were you getting involved in games, and like what was the first game work you were working on?
Let's see. I think the first thing I did was for, and I think this is through, it probably was something that came through the Game Audio Network Guild, and it was a game called Tommy Tronic that I think it came out in 2009, but we were working on it for a couple of years before that. I think that was the first thing that I worked on. It was some developer who was an English guy but lived in Croatia or something. I can't remember. It was all done via email. But anyway, I think that was the first thing that I worked on. Yeah, and then just kind of started to grow from there. People started to get to know my work, and then once things changed quite a bit. Obviously, when we had things like Facebook games and iOS, and those things started to happen, then there were a lot more opportunities for people who were kind of in my position, because before you had to basically work in a AAA studio. There wasn't a lot of indie development in those days. There wasn't small games. There were, but they weren't as widespread because there wasn't Facebook games, there wasn't iOS or Android, and so when those things started to become a viable place to sell games, that meant a lot more opportunities for people who never worked in AAA, which at that point I hadn't. So it was a great way to just build a big resume of games pretty quickly.
And were you working, full time on game related music, or was it, half and half, or?
Oh, when I started?
Yeah.
It was fortunately I had my own music company, which did all aspects of music. We sold T-shirts for bands, we sold albums for bands, we sold our own labels, music, and so my wife was running that, and I was able to kind of transition from there into games. So over the course of, say, I was pretty lucky, and I think it's because I had that experience of running a business. Even though it was the music industry, it was good experience to know how to run a business and know what my expectations of it should be. So I think that helped me. Within a year, I was working. I had about a year time where I was transitioning, and within a year, I was doing full-time freelance game audio. I don't think that's probably true for most people, but I had such a huge background in recording, and I knew all that part of it already, and then I had the business side on top of that, which I think really helps when talking to developers who were potential partners, knowing that I didn't sound like some kid just right out of school who had crazy expectations for his music and had a big ego. I think having the business side really helped me advance pretty quickly.
Would would you have advice from someone starting now, someone straight out of school who wants to get into audio or music for games?
Yeah, I think the best thing to do is to get experience. And so how do you get experience when you're at that point in your career? Well, it's probably a waste of time to go around and get to know, well, it's not completely a waste of time, but it's probably not good to be sending your CD or your demo or send your tracks in emails to audio directors at EA or BioWare or Blizzard or whatever. That probably won't get you very far because they get a lot of that kind of stuff. What you need to probably do is get involved in making your own games and prove to people that you can be a part of a team and actually create with a team and work with a team well, not just be somebody who makes a music file and then sends it over and then you're done, because those days of kind of doing that are really over. You have to be someone who can integrate in a team and figure out how to work in the interactive medium that you're working in. So how do you do that? Probably things like game jams are a great place to start while you're in school. Get a lot of experience doing game jams and seeing what's possible. Meeting other students who are also making games. If you're in a music department and your school has any kind of game design classes or anything about that or technology, there's probably people there who are interested in making games, and so try and meet as many people as you can who are at the same level that you're at in school or just out of school, and you'll probably work on some stuff together where no one's making any money, but you're making things, and having a finished game, just finishing something, is quite an accomplishment. So finish something, and then you have that on your resume, and you can point to people and say, hey, you can even download my work. Here I made a video about how I implemented my audio into this game, and keep doing things like that, and people will start to get to know you. Getting on Twitter and using the game audio hashtag, you'll find all of us who are in the industry. Eventually, it probably won't take too long, and you'll see that we're all talking to each other and all know each other. So that's a good place to kind of go and get familiar with what other people are doing, what they're working on, and there's Facebook groups and whatnot. I think the best advice, though, I could give is to show people what you can do before you start going out there and saying, hey, I'm a composer, I'm a sound designer, hire me, because that's usually a turnoff. It's usually, here's some stuff I did, and what do you think of it? And I have the ability to be part of a team and implement my audio. I don't just sit there and crank out content. I actually implement it in the game, and I try to make the game a better experience. I work with the game designer and the coders. We find the best way to do this. That shows people a lot more of your abilities than just posting a site with, like an audio reskin of Assassin's Creed trailer or something like that.
That's interesting. Yeah, I totally agree with all that advice. You mentioned there, doing more than just making music. Can you maybe talk us through kind of your process, how you, what you do in in audio and games, and how you do it?
Sure. Yeah. I kind of work in a lot of different, how do we call it? I guess different kind of roles really, depending on the developer that I'm working with. With some developers, if it's someone I haven't worked with too much before, and they don't have a very robust game engine on their side, I might be just playing their game, hopefully if they have a build of it, and sending them some assets, and they put it in the game, and then my job is done. I don't necessarily like doing that because it's not so much fun for me. I don't get to hear the sounds in the game, and I can't really tweak things. But that's one role that I have taken depending on the developer and where they're at in the process. On the other hand, I've also worked on a game like, say something like Gathering Sky, which was an indie game, but I worked really, really closely with the developers. It was a small team, 3 people, an artist and 2 coders/designers, and myself, and we spent a year integrating Fmod into Java, and then we went through this whole process of trying out all the music, putting it in the build, all the sound design, iterating and iterating and iterating over and over again, getting all these things to work together. Mostly it was me putting things in Fmod, putting it in the game, seeing how it would work, and that's really the exciting aspect of working on audio in a game, because then you really get to dial in on the things that you want to dial in, and you don't have to bother a coder or an engineer or anybody else. You can just do it in Fmod or whatever your middleware is. I happen to be using Fmod for this project, and then you can really tweak it out and get things sounding exactly how you want them to sound, and then ideas will spring up from that. You'll say, oh, wouldn't it be cool if I could do something like this? Like in that game, you're guiding these birds along the screen, and you're constantly moving up and down on the screen, and it's on iPad and it's also on computer. But if you're on the iPad, your finger is literally going up and down the screen. And so at one point, we had the idea to try and do an XY coordinate that affects the EQ filters on the wind as you're going, so that as you're going, your finger will actually be affecting how the wind sounds as you go through. So that was something that came up as we were, iterating through the game, and it seemed like a good idea. And it's a super subtle effect, but we put it in there, and I think it really adds to the audio and the whole experience of the game, even though it's very subtle. So I had a lot of questions later after that game came out, like, how did you get the music to sync up so well with everything that happens in the game? I mean, everything is beautifully synced up, and that took a lot of work on the implementation side. So in that particular case, in that role, I was basically a team member and really integrating my work from start to finish, and we got a great experience out of it. So so that's an example of like what I really, really like to do, and if we can do it and we have the time and budget to do it, then that's what I like to do. So it's everything from just kicking over some assets to somebody who doesn't quite have audio middleware going, to the other extreme of what we did in Gathering Sky. Like I say, I've said in other things, and I've done a talk on it about integrating the audio early on when you're designing a game. It can make a huge difference as far as how the designers start to see how the audio will work. One example I use is from Star Wars. In Star Wars, they knew they had the character R2-D2, and R2-D2 wasn't much of a character on paper. They designed what he looked like, and the way that they worked on that movie is they had the first reel, edited reel, come in, and then Ben Burt, who was a sound designer, would do all the sound design for that first reel. Things are a little different now, but that's the way they were doing it in those days, because they were working in Marin County here, that weren't in Hollywood. It was kind of an independent project itself, really. And Ben Burt started creating these sounds for R2-D2, and they played the first reel back to everybody, and everyone in Lucas was flipping out because they had no idea that R2-D2 could sound the way that Ben Burt made R2-D2 sound. So this character was a very, very, very minor character when they had that first reel of film. Started getting a bigger role as the film went on, because they knew they could cut to R2 and get these reaction shots because of the sound that Ben Burt could give to R2, the voice that he gave to R2. So that changed the scope of R2's part through the whole film and all the rest of the films. That's a good example of how it kind of works in games too. You might have parts of your game that you hadn't thought about. Maybe there's an audio cue that players hear that they know to do X, Y, or Z in the game. You hadn't thought about that. It was going to be a visual representation, but now it's something in audio, and the players can respond to that more intuitively than seeing something on screen all the time, or maybe it's too busy to have a visual communication of that. So working those things in early in the process can really help you design your game too.
That's really interesting about R2D2. So you're kind of selling this idea through sound. You know, there's no, like, the little robot just didn't move or anything. You know, there was no animations there.
Right.
That's cool, and you can do a lot of that in games, and I certainly don't do enough of it, using sound to suggest things you're not even doing. You know.
Oh, I see a question. Should I answer the
Yes.
the
So
question?
Stephen Kelly's saying, is it tricky to be good at music and sound effects for games? So the two of them, they seem like two different skills to me. Also, how do you go about recording sound effects?
Yeah, so they are kind of two different skills, but they're definitely related. I tend to like working in both sound design and music. A lot of that reason is because with these smaller titles, mostly in the mobile sphere now, and some independent games like Gathering Sky, there's only room for one person to be the audio team. So I end up being the one-person audio team for most of the things that I work on. So I like to have sort of a big picture view of how everything's going to work together, the sound design and the music. And oftentimes I'm tuning the sound design to work with the background music. So the background music is in C minor. I know I can have the any kind of musical sound design, UI sounds or whatever, they'll also be in C minor. So I'm finding notes that work with whatever the background music is. That's fairly common. So it's good to be well versed in both of those things. I've certainly had games like Skulls of the Shogun where I was only sound designing. And that's fine. I don't mind doing that. And in that game, there was no real fine-tuning to the music because those sounds were all based on dead samurai ghosts. So there wasn't very musical. So it's nice to be able to have both skills. Sometimes I say that mixing little bits of sound design is like writing a haiku, whereas mixing a song is sort of like writing a short story. They're the same skills. You have to learn how to be efficient and how to layer things properly and know specifically what you want from each one of those layers of your sound in both the song and in sound design. So they're definitely related skills. And having a musical ear will help you a lot if you're a sound designer. I know some sound designers that have no musical background, which I think is a little bit crazy, but they're great sound designers, so it can be done. And then how do you go about recording sound effects? Was that what it was? Yeah. So there's a lot of things you can do. There's a lot of great videos out there. There's a great site called designingsound.org. If you haven't been to it, designingsound.org is really a great site that has a lot of stuff about this all the time, and they keep it updated all the time. But you can use something like this. I've got it right here on my desk. This is a Sony M10, and you can go around with that. And that's got, I know the guys in Call of Duty, the Advanced Warfare guys at Sledgehammer, they all use these, that very recorder. For going out and recording. They use big expensive mics too, but they've told me that most of the time they end up using the sounds from that thing. So Sony M10 is a $200 little recorder. So you can take that out and record various things with it. Record stuff in your house. You can get some great sounds just recording your kitchen, which I've done. Use contact mics and put them on things like a squeaky door or a cardboard and cut the cardboard with a knife and get all sorts of crazy sounds. There's a lot of different ways about going about recording sounds, and then using synthesis too, depending on the type of game you're doing. You may want to have just all synthesized sounds, which comes from using synthesizers, either software or hardware synthesizers. And then tools like Reactor from Native Instruments, those things like that, or Pure Data, can generate a lot of really great synthesized sounds as well. So that's a big big kettle of fish to jump into there with how to record sound effects. But you know, starting with a little handheld recorder and wearing earphones while you're recording is a great way to learn what's a good sound and what's not a good sound, and how to place the mic the right way. Okay, I'm looking at Brenda's question here.
I'll just read it out
Designer, and I'm
for
just
people.
coming up with
Okay, go for it.
Okay.
Okay. This is Brenda's question, Brenda Romero. As a designer, when I'm just coming up with an idea for a game and I'm in the early prototype stage, what kind of information is useful for you to give me some scratch audio? Do you prefer samples or would you rather compose from a blank state?
Sometimes I find it helpful if I'm working with someone who's not a musician or has any music background or anything, to just give me some examples of either music or sound design ideas. Like you know, sometimes it's helpful to know, like, they can describe something, but their version of describing something to me could be very different than what I'm hearing as they describe it to me. So it's because we have this difference in language in regards to music. So someone could describe something to me as maybe harsh or aggressive, and I might not describe it the same way. So getting examples is a good way to kind of avoid that problem. So if someone's just getting started, getting a few YouTube clips of music or some WAV files or whatever it is of things that they like, and they can tell me what it is they like. Like, I really like the way the percussion works in this song, or I really like the background vocals in this, and I'd like to do something like that. Just getting little tidbits of information like that can be really helpful. And then, you know, in a prototype stage too, sometimes I won't even create music for that. Sometimes I'll go through some of my collection of either things that I've worked on already or music that I already like or something I'd like to do, and I might just prototype a game with something before I start creating. Take a clip of, I don't know, a Lounge Lizard song and drop it into a game and see if that kind of feel works at all before I start creating something. So sometimes it is really good to have that kind of information, or even if it's just touchstones, like, you know, I want this to kind of feel like this opening scene in True Detective. That's the kind of feeling I'm going for. Something like that could be really helpful.
That's very interesting because I basically was an awful person to work for recently with our sound design and Gilded Engineering because I didn't know what I wanted. So I just said, this is the style, this is the game, it's silly, it's got humor, but I really didn't know what I wanted. And Steve Griggin did a great job by just producing music and then us kind of taking it from there. But it was, so that's the blank slate, I think. Make music,
Right.
I don't know what I want.
Right, that's a real common problem, and I'll find a lot that with people that's usually the biggest thing to overcome, is that they're maybe not so sure what they want, and it can be really frustrating sometimes. I had one client a few years ago who hadn't ever been put in the role where he had to interact with the sound designer, but he was sort of the lead on the project and didn't really want to be. And he was kind of forced in that position, and going through a lot of the sounds, we would just round after round after round and it was costing them so much money. And it was because this guy didn't really know what he wanted, and it can get to be very frustrating if you find yourself in that position on both sides. So usually getting a few examples of games can help. In that instance, it didn't, because he kept telling me he wanted one of the sounds to sound just like a sound in Clash of Clans, and I don't know why he wanted that sound. It was like the tap sound in Clash of Clans. I don't know if he thought that was going to make his game a million seller or what he thought, but I remember having a meeting where we kept playing the Clash of Clans tap, and the 2 or 3 that I provided for them, which sounded basically the same, and spending a half an hour comparing them all, and it seemed like a huge waste of time. So sometimes it can't help you, but usually it does.
That tap sound might be the secret that they have for Clash of Clans. We don't know. I'll move on to another question here.
Yeah, maybe that's it.
From Ronan Pierce. He's saying, hi, do you have a process or a routine for creativity? Do you have any particular sources of inspiration or places where you like to compose?
So yeah, the process usually is for games. The best inspiration is if I can play the game. if there's a build or something to play, because that will give you it gives you a lot of information that's hard to quantify verbally or in text, because there's sort of a rhythm to a game when you're playing it. There's sort of this natural flow, and you can describe something to me as it's sort of this game meets that game, and that puts some kind of idea in my head. But then until I sit down and play it, I won't really know what the tempo of the music should be, or how much I should emphasize one instrument versus another. That the mix really has a lot to do with how the game plays as well. So that's usually the first bit of inspiration that comes to me, is actually playing the game and getting a feel for that. With some projects, it's just sort of like, I do a lot of there's one client I have where I do a lot of IP-based music that has to be sort of similar to what fits their IP. So things like that, you just kind of go into this. All right, I know this this particular cartoon, and I know the kind of style of music it is. So Warner Brothers cartoon style. Okay, go. Okay, just go do that, and it doesn't require a lot of sitting around and thinking about inspiration. I just kind of know, okay, I have to do sort of this Carl Stalling, Raymond Scott thing. Okay, I'm going to go do that. And then other times you have a game like Gathering Sky where you just try things over and over and over again. And even though I was able to play the game, that took a lot of dialing in to get that in, to get the right feeling for that game, and get the right instruments, even though I had been playing it for a while. But as far as getting back to your question, any particular sources? Well, it's interesting. Being our biggest problem is being audio people, whether we're a composer or a sound designer, working in games or film or TV, whatever it is, we're constantly listening to our own stuff, and we never have time to just listen to new music. So it's one of my great regrets in this career path, is I hardly ever get a chance to listen to music. I don't have a commute. I just work in my basement studio, so I don't have a chance to get in the car and listen to anything. So I don't often listen to other music for inspiration. I have a vast collection of CDs and records from growing up and collecting music through the years. And sometimes I'll go through that and look for something, because I have a lot of weird stuff that you probably can't even find on YouTube or whatever. I might go to that for inspiration. But in a way, in working in games, listening to other games when I'm playing them, because I do try to make time for playing games, and sometimes that's all the inspiration I need. Like I'm playing Half-Life 2 right now, and that game is full of inspiration. Everywhere in that game there's a lot of inspiration for doing things. So in any kind of art I engage with, usually there's something really inspiring about that. Or listening to the work my colleagues do. We're in touch a lot, and I'm always hearing what they're doing. For instance, the guys at the PopCap audio team are doing amazing things with mobile game audio that none of us would have thought was possible. And that's really inspiring. Seeing what they can do with 5 megabytes of sound is pretty terrific. So that's all really, real inspirational. I don't really have a particular place I have to go to apart from being here in my room, where I have all my gear and my computer. Usually I'm just writing in here. I think I've gotten past the point where I kind of get a writer's block and have to walk around and try playing guitar in another room or something. I can use it to sit down here and come up with something. Although the one thing I've noticed about the way my brain works is sometimes it takes a day or two. If I have a lot of heavy writing to do, just composition, straight composition, sometimes it takes a day or two for me to get in that frame of mind where I'm just thinking that way and can just sit down and just keep going in that flow state that I've kind of established. It depends on the type of game you're working on. But for me, I know if I have to do a lot of, say, spreadsheet work or invoicing, which I have to do as a freelancer, you have to kind of take on that part of the job. And if I'm doing a lot of that during the day, it's hard for me to get in that flow state of writing composition-wise, because my brain just takes a long time for that that switch to occur. It's slower than probably most people. So so it takes me a little bit to get in that flow state to write, but I don't necessarily have to be in a particular place.
Cool.
I hope that answers that question. Yeah.
So I've got another question here from Seamus Hickey. Seamus says, I'm working on controlling the music on my game so it's reactive to tension and calm. Would the best approach be to have different instruments of my made-up orchestra fade in as the game gets more difficult, e.g. life bars below 50 bring in the horns?
That's one way you could do it. Yeah, I mean, I assume that you're using some audio middleware to make that happen. But that's certainly one thing you can try, and that's a typical solution to that problem where you have different layers of tensities. Or intensities. I don't know what the right word is there. I think it's a made-up game word. But so you'll have like one layer is sort of the calm layer, and then you have layers, musical layers on top of that are designed to work with the bottom layer, and as you bring them in, you create different levels of tension throughout the game. So that's definitely one way you can do it, and then you tie that to a parameter that is, in this case, it looks like your life bar. So so that's certainly one option to try to do it that way. You could do other things possibly, like maybe you have your bass pad of music, and it's kind of calm. And depending on the type of game, this is another thing where you have to play the game to see what works well with the play style. But as you're going along, you could also have little stingers that just pop out, or a warning as the health bar starts to get down. One thing other people do a lot is they'll change the EQ. As health meters go down, you'll have the EQ start to take all the high end frequency range out, so it rolls off the high end and it starts getting more muffled, as you've probably heard that in games too. So there's a variety of different things you can try. Bringing in more instruments usually is when you have a battle and you're getting ready to fight, or you're really engaged in a battle, then you'll have the most intense music. The hardest thing in those situations is ramping down from that high state. You have to have a lot of ramps that take you back down through the process and get you back to a more calm state. So that's the tricky part in going from something tense to something calm. It's easy to ramp up, and ramping down is a little trickier. So
to make it less jarring when the horns suddenly stop?
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. They can really feel unnatural, so that takes a lot of tweaking and playing around with.
And do you think doing that kind of work, that it helps that you're doing both sound design and composing, that you're not just
Sure.
sending over finished music?
Oh yeah. Well, in that case, you'd have to be working within an audio middleware tool. You'd have to be working in Wise or Fmod or Fabric to even see how that would work. I mean, you could do it a little bit in your DAW and play around with the layers that way, but until you actually get it into the middleware tool, play around with it, and then I'd even go as far to say is until you hear it in the game, you kind of don't know anything. And I tell this to a lot of the developers I work with. I'll send them something, and they'll say, well, I'm not sure if that's going to work. And I said, well, we can't make a judgment until we actually hear it in context, because none of us know anything. We'll put it in the game, and then we'll all have a super clear idea of what needs to change. And that could be anything from the EQ on that particular sound or music has to change, or the length, or maybe the tail is too long. You don't know it until you get it in the game. You can listen to it outside of the game all you want, but you have no idea until it's actually in there, and we're all hearing it in the context of the game. And especially with something like that, where you've got reactive music, you have to hear it in the game. Otherwise, you won't know anything. And then having some kind of sound design background can certainly help with that if you understand how that works. Because maybe you want to add sound design elements as the music ramps up too. Maybe there's something in the game that's really particular. I'm thinking of, like, I don't even know if they did this, but in a game like Infamous, where you have electrical powers, maybe as you're ramping up into a game, you want to add some kind of electrical sound design to indicate to the player that you're building up for a battle here, and maybe that's part of the music system. Just things like that often come up.
Very interesting. I've got another question here from
All
Colin
right.
Guilfoyle. As a game designer developer looking to hire an audio person for the first time, moving on from stock audio options, what should I look for? I.e., how do I find the next Dren?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I know that's a bit of a roadblock for a lot of people, because you put something on Twitter or Reddit, say I'm looking for a game audio person, you will get literally bombarded by a bunch of people, and that means, oh, now I've got to go through all of these websites and listen to all of them, and then I've got to answer all these questions from people who are saying, hey, did you get my email? I want to work on your game. Because there's a lot of people wanting to get into game audio. So that can be a daunting task, to say the least. So there's a few places maybe you can go. If you're just trying to be, I guess, a little bit discreet about it without just putting an ad up or doing something like that, you might go to some place like the Game Audio Network Guild, which is audiogang.org, and that's sort of a membership site of audio people, and they all have profiles that you can go through. So that's one place. You can go on Twitter, certainly, and just use that hashtag, the Game Audio Twitter hashtag, and that'll give you a pretty good indication of a lot of the different people that are working now, and a lot of entry-level people. You might contact someone like me or some of the other people on the Game Audio hashtag. If you follow it a little bit, you might get to know some people, and you might end up feeling a connection with one or two voices instead of maybe everybody. And everyone is so responsive in the game audio community. If you just kind of sent them a DM or hit them on Twitter and said, hey, I'm looking for somebody, do you have any recommendations? That might be a good way to go. Yeah, I would stay away from Facebook or Reddit. Those things are kind of filled with lots of voices and maybe won't help you narrow it down. Those are all good ideas to try. Let's see, I'm trying to think. Maybe just looking at any other games that you've recently played, maybe independent games where you've enjoyed how something sounded. You might be able to find people that way. I was at a game meetup here in San Francisco recently. Someone was working on sort of a 16-bit style retro type of game, and they heard I was in audio, and they said, oh, look at our game. Would you want to work on it? And I saw the game style, and they told me they wanted to do some kind of chip tune kind of thing. And I said, well, chip tunes are great. It's not really what I do most of the time. I do know a guy who's great at it, and you should get a hold of him. And I give my friend Jimmy Henson's name, who goes by the name he goes by the name of Big Giant Circles, and he does a lot of that stuff. And he's like, oh my God, you know that guy? He's super famous. And I was like, well, no, he'll probably work in your game for you if you just send him an email. So sometimes we have this idea that people are too busy or important or whatnot to work on your projects, but chances are you can probably be able to find somebody who does have a little bit of a name or recognition who might have time to work on your project if they like it. But if you're just looking for beginner type people or early entry people, that's always an option. Or schools, if you have a nearby school that has an audio department, that would be a great way to find somebody. Probably better than just putting out the all call out there on the internet saying you're looking for an audio person, because that'll turn everybody off. It's like putting an ad on Craigslist or something for, a car that's cheap, and you get tons and tons of these unwanted emails. So maybe those are some good things to try.
That sounds really good. Brenda kind of had a side question there. How do we hire Dren? How do we pitch you on a game we're working on to get you excited?
Yeah, well, hey, just send me an email. Tell me about your game. I'm happy to listen. I mean, I kind of try to balance out my schedule with things that pay the bills, the Zyngas and the Play Firsts and all those clients that I have. And then I also try to do things like Gathering Sky, because it's I feel like those kind of games are important to have out there, and it, I don't know, there's something about the work for hire stuff that pays the bills, and I enjoy doing that stuff. I don't have a problem with it, but it's nice to balance out with stuff that maybe doesn't have a hard deadline, things that I can iterate on a lot, things that I feel I can really contribute to in a super creative way, and balance those with the things that pay the bills. So I'm always interested in hearing about projects that might be fun or experimental to work on. I did this game with my friend Ben Vance called The Pack, which was only in a museum. It was in the Oakland Museum back a couple of years ago, and they built a whole cabinet for it, and it was a 5-minute experience. And I hardly anyone ever played it, but it was just a fun project to work on. So things like that are just kind of good for the soul, I think.
So maybe having a fun project or an interesting project might be a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, of course, that's my interpretation. You might think it's super interesting. I might think it's boring, or the other way around. But yeah.
Okay. It's kind
And
of
Something
linked
Like
to this
Gathering Sky was
actually.
a really what's that?
This just the next question is kind of linked to this, which is from Ronan.
Oh.
He's just saying, are there any musical genres that you particularly enjoy composing in? Do you get much time or energy for personal composition?
Okay, yeah. Um, it's funny. When I was in a band and played all the time, it was a really eclectic. I had a few different bands, but the one that did the most touring was a pretty eclectic kind of group. We had a trombone and a clarinet and accordion, stand-up bass, and I played banjo and guitar, and it was a band that could never decide what it wanted to be. It was kind of a little bit the Pogues, kind of a little bit Tom Waits, kind of a good analog would be I forgot the name of that band. There's another band that does. I'll come to the name of it, but um, we were kind of in all sorts of styles: klezmer, cabaret, Eastern European music. It was all over the map, and even still, just playing that kind of music, I really got sick of playing those songs all the time. And I like working in a lot of different genres. So it's just as fun for me to be working in something like Gunman Taco Truck, which is this kind of apocalyptic, happy mariachi music. I've got something like that to work in, which is really super fun. And then doing something that's like what I did for Counter-Strike, which is sort of this dark orchestral hybrid kind of music. That's really fun to me too. I think what's most fun is finding a game project where I'm really excited about the game and trying to find a style that fits that game. So it's maybe not quite accurate to say I really like writing orchestrally in the style of like Disney film, or I like writing like Danny Elfman style music. It's more like I really like writing a really original type of hybrid type of music for a game that is using music in a different way, or coming up with its own genre. Like the Dangerous Dave music, I called Chipbilly because it was a little bit of chip music and a lot of kind of hillbilly swamp blues kind of music. So it's a hybrid that didn't exist. So I like kind of creating those kind of weird hybrids of music that didn't necessarily exist before. That's probably my favorite kind of music to write, is something that didn't really exist before, but now exists because of this game. What was the next part? Personal composition. Not as much time as I'd like. I do have an album of songs that I'm working on, because I feel like more than a composer, I'm a songwriter. I did that first, and I still feel the magic of songwriting. When you come up with a really great song, it's like designing a great game. Like, you really feel great about it. There's a big reward there. And so I have this album of songs I've been trying to finish. I've got 2 done. So I'm still working on it though, and I wish I did have a little more time for it. But that's, I enjoy doing the music I'm doing now too. So it's hard to say that I'm regretful about it. But I'll still work on it. I'm going to finish something probably this year.
Cool. I've got a question from Kaz about tools. Is Fmod your go-to audio middleware? Which other ones would you recommend? And any thoughts on adaptive audio programs such as Elias software?
Right. Um, I've used FMOD on a couple of projects just because I've shipped a couple games with it before, but they're all great. I don't. I would love to do a project in Wise. I just haven't had a developer who wanted to use it yet. It really depends on the developer and the team and what they're kind of comfortable in using. Excuse me. So sometimes it's not really up to me. FMOD is great, and they're improving it all the time. Like I'd say in the last year, they've made a huge leap as far as stability and keeping that tool working great and getting new things, new features built into it. Wise is really fantastic too, as is Fabric. It's kind of crazy to think that we have all these options now, because it used to be that you didn't get to play with audio middleware unless you were in-house at EA or in-house at Blizzard or in-house at Sony. So now that we have all these things available to us that people are actually using, it's really been a pretty terrific change in the landscape of things. I mean, that's come along with using Unity and Unreal for free and things like that. So I wouldn't say that's always my go-to. I'm happy to use any of them to try and make the game audio better. I have a project I'm starting this week where we're using Master Audio in Unity, and I'm just happy they want to use something instead of vanilla Unity audio. So it's great. I haven't used Elias. I've been hearing things about it, and I saw a couple of the Gamasutra articles about it. It looks kind of interesting, but I have yet to meet a developer that's using it yet. So maybe we'll see how many people get on board with that particular tool. But from what I saw, it looked like it could be pretty cool. But all of them, Wise, FMOD, Fabric, they're all great and all do a lot of really wonderful things.
So I have a question. In the last few years, have you played any more indie games, not AAA, that have really blown away you with either their audio design or music?
Sure. Now I'm going to have to remember what I played. Well, let's see. One game that I really did enjoy was Unfinished Swan. That's probably a couple of years ago, but Joel did a great job of the music in that game, and I don't know if you played that one, but that one really had a nice blend of this kind of childlike approach to this.
And you can't see anything in that game, right? I haven't played it, but I know it. You can't see anything until you kind of paint your
Right,
whiteboard,
that's how
isn't
it
it?
starts.
Okay, yeah.
The mechanic really changes as you go through the game, but that's how it starts. You have to you have to shoot out these paintballs in order to see the world. But audio has a huge part of that game because you can't see anything. So you're kind of hearing the collusion of objects in front of you. So you have to kind of find your way based on audio sometimes too. And sound designer Mike Niederquell did a really wonderful job with that game. There was only one sound designer and only one composer, and they just did a fantastic job of making that game intuitive with the audio to help guide the player through the little mazes and find things, because you can't rely on visuals in that game. And I don't think it probably got enough credit for all the neat things that it did in that game. I'm trying to think about some other indie games that I've enjoyed. I haven't played that. There's that new one that comes with a MIDI controller. I haven't played it yet, but I really want to. The David Kanega game. I'm spacing on the name of it, but it's like a whole music experience where you can buy a MIDI controller and play it, or you can play it with your mouse, and it's a whole interactive music thing. Yeah, panoramical. Yeah, I think that's it. There you go. That one looks really interesting. I want to play that. I haven't played it yet. And let's see. A game. This not. Well, let's see. I was going to give you a AAA game that I thought sounded good, but I won't say that one.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Well, I didn't like the game, but the actual audio in the game is pretty fantastic for The Last of Us. They did a really remarkable job of painting an audio picture in that game that doesn't get too muddy. There's not too much stuff happening. It's the subtleties in the audio in that game in creating the atmospheres and the ambience, the sound design and the way that they programmed all that in the game to make it work and make it believable, knowing when something was creeping up on you or nearby. You had a really good sense of where those creatures were or where danger was as you played the game, and so they did a really great job on the audio in that game.
Any guesses how many people would have been involved in just sound there?
Oh, they have a huge team. I think the music team is something like over a dozen, like 15 people or so on the music team, plus the composer and his team.
Wow.
And that's just music. And then they've got, I don't know how many different people were on that game, but I know it was split up between Santa Monica, San Diego, and probably San Mateo as well. So they probably had at least 30 people on sound for that game, plus some the Naughty Dog sound designers. So that they have a lot of people on games like that. There's just so much to do.
That's crazy.
But they have a really good pipeline set up there where, right from the get-go, especially working with Naughty Dog, that's a good example of an audio team working closely with a developer. And all the Naughty Dog games, they all sound wonderful because they have the whole Sony team working with them from the beginning with the designer. So, all those Uncharted games and Last of Us, they all sound fantastic because they've worked together a lot and they work together from the beginning on any project. So they're lucky to have that.
Cool. So we've already had you over an hour here, so I'm just going to do one last question for Seamus here. So he says, Giant Ant Farm are pretty good. Ever going to reform the band for a game soundtrack? And is there a different approach when designing sound or score for VR, for virtual reality?
I'm impressed that you know my old band, Giant Ant Farm. I'm in touch with a few of them, but I don't know if we'd ever get together to reform for a game soundtrack. Maybe we'd do something similar, or I'd hire some of those guys to play on it. But we're all kind of split up. A couple of them live in LA. I live up here. One lives in Europe, so it might be hard. But that is a cool idea. I'd love to do a soundtrack that had those elements of what Giant Ant Farm was in it. A little bit of klezmer, a little Eastern European, Kurt Weill influenced kind of music. I think would be awesome for a game at some point. Oh, Go Go Bordello, that was the band I was trying to remember. They're similar to what we used to do. So okay, different approach when designing sound score for VR. Yeah, it's that's an interesting question that's coming up a lot. And basically, with VR, you're excuse me, you're working in binaural sound, which is what we hear naturally out of our ears. So when we're listening, when we're mixing a record or music, we're not really thinking binaurally per se. We're just thinking of a sound image, a stereo image. But when you want to recreate something binaurally, you're taking into account, the occlusion that happens between your head and a sound over here and the other parts of your ear. So if I have a sound coming out over here, it's going to sound different to this ear than it sounds to this ear. And so that's how you're thinking of things binaurally, how you're actually hearing things in real life with two ears. So you might record audio. They actually have microphone sets with a head. It's a fake head, and it's got microphones on either side. Neumann makes one of these heads, and you can record sound. They take it out in a forest and record sound binaurally, so you're actually getting an image of what our ears hear by using a microphone that's basically on two ears of a head. So you're kind of thinking about that first and foremost with VR. And then, as far as music, thinking about score, I think there's a lot of possibilities there. No one really is figuring out what they all are yet. I know Sony did a talk on it. I don't know if it was this last GDC or if it was another conference, but they did. Some of the guys from the UK Sony office were talking about some of their demos for Morpheus, or whatever it's called, Sony VR now, and they were talking about how they had the music working in there. And like, there's one game where you're sliding down a hill and you're hearing the music that's basically coming out of the cars that are on the street as you're going down. It was one way they utilized it. Hearing, you're in a virtual reality experience, not a movie or cinematic experience. So it might seem really weird to have just music start playing like you're watching Star Wars, and all of a sudden you're hearing music like Star Wars in your virtual reality experience. It's not a cinematic experience. So how do you make the music work within that virtual reality? Is it coming out of a radio that's in your virtual reality world, or how's it working? It's really going to depend on whatever that virtual reality experience is, I think. But everyone's still trying to figure that out, and probably will be for a while. So it's a big question. Probably still needs some answering. And what was that last?
He's just
Was it
admitting to not
Twixter
being that
YouTube?
hip.
Oh, okay.
To know your band.
Oh, okay.
Cool. I think let's wrap it up. Thanks so much for taking the time and talking to us all.
Yeah,
That was really interesting. I'm not gonna
I hope so.
applaud, but everyone just say thank you.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening.
That was wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, no problem.
We'll send all our sound questions your way from now on.
All right, yeah, happy to listen to what they are.
Thank you so much.
All right, yeah, take care.
Take care.